Greetings, dear seekers, dear companions on the path of self-mastery. There are people who try harder every day, yet feel weaker over time. The more they want to change, the more they feel pulled backward, not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack willpower, but because they are misunderstanding themselves. Have you ever noticed there are days you wake up with absolute clarity? Today I will begin. Today I will be disciplined. And yet, nothing collapses all at once. It simply shifts, just a little. A message appears, a random thought passes, a subtle feeling whispers, not quite ready. And you tell yourself, just for a moment, just a quick check. But that moment is where the direction changes, like a boat drifting just a few degrees off course. At first, no one notices, but the further it goes, the farther it moves away from its destination, until one day, it is no longer on its path at all. The same is true for you. You don't stop suddenly. You simply move away from what matters gently. You pick up your phone, not because you want to escape. You watch a video, not because you don't care. You search for more information, not because you are lazy. And yet each small action is quietly dissolving your focus, piece by piece. And the most dangerous part is you don't even see it. You still feel busy. You still believe you are trying. But in reality, you are circling around the starting point. In Eastern philosophy, there is a phrase, the mind is like a monkey, the intention like a wild horse, always jumping, always running, always pulled by whatever appears. And without training, a person can live an entire life being led by their own mind, not by circumstances, not by other people, but by the smallest inner movements they never learned to steady. So the problem was never laziness, because a truly lazy person does not struggle to change. But you think, you reflect, you want more. The truth is, your mind has not yet become steady enough to hold you in place when you begin. In deeper Eastern wisdom, it is said, when the mind is scattered, energy disperses. When energy disperses, action becomes fragmented. You think you're doing many things, but in truth, you are being divided. You think you lack discipline, but in truth, you lack inner alignment. And when the inside is fragmented, the outside can never be consistent. So perhaps it is time to ask a different question. Not, how can I try harder? But what is pulling my mind away every single day? Because the force that keeps you stuck is not laziness. It is the subtle movements within you that you have never learned to stop. Part 1, the lie you've been carrying after a while. If you repeat something enough times, it begins to feel like the truth. Not because it is true, but because it is familiar. And one of the most dangerous labels a person can repeat to themselves is this: I'm lazy. It sounds simple, almost harmless. But if you look closely, that sentence carries weight. Because the moment you say it, you are no longer describing an action. You are defining an identity. And once something becomes identity, you stop questioning it, you stop challenging it, you stop trying to understand it. You accept it. Think about it. When you say, I didn't do the work today, there is still space to ask why, space to adjust, space to try again. But when you say, I'm lazy, that space disappears. Now it is no longer about today. It is about who you are. And that is where the trap begins, because most people who call themselves lazy are not people who don't want to act. They are people who tried and couldn't sustain action. There is a difference, a very important difference. A lazy person does not feel tension. They don't sit there thinking about what they should be doing. They don't feel that quiet discomfort in the back of their mind. They don't replay the day at night, wondering where the time went. But you do. You sit down to start, and something inside you resists, not loudly, but subtly. A thought appears, maybe I should organize things first, and it feels reasonable, so you follow it. Then another thought, let me just check something quickly. Again, reasonable. Then another, I need a better plan before I begin. Still reasonable. And before you realize it, you've spent an hour moving around the task without ever touching it. Now here's the important part. From the outside, it looks like laziness, but from the inside, it feels like effort, because you were not resting. You were thinking, deciding, preparing, switching. Your mind was active the entire time, just not in the direction that mattered. This is why so many people feel exhausted without having done anything meaningful. It is not physical exhaustion. It is cognitive fragmentation. Every time you shift your attention, a small part of your mind stays behind. on the previous task, on the previous thought, on the previous distraction. And when you try to return, you are no longer whole. You are divided. Part of you is here, part of you is still there. And the more this happens, the harder it becomes to begin. Not because you are lazy, but because your mind no longer has the stability to hold one direction. Imagine trying to walk in a straight line while being pulled slightly from multiple sides. Each pull is small, barely noticeable, but together they make it impossible to move forward. This is what distraction does. It doesn't stop you, it redirects you, quietly, gradually, constantly. And over time, this creates a dangerous illusion. You begin to believe, I'm just not disciplined enough. I don't have what it takes. Other people can do it. I can't. But what you're really experiencing is not a lack of character. It is a lack of clarity and stability. You were never taught how to hold your attention. You were never trained to stay with discomfort long enough for it to pass. So every time something feels unclear or slightly difficult, your mind looks for an exit, not because you want to quit, but because you were never shown how to stay. And this is where everything changes, because the moment you stop saying I'm lazy and start seeing my attention is unstable, you regain power. Now the problem is no longer fixed. It becomes trainable, something you can observe, something you can adjust, something you can strengthen, just like a muscle. But before you can train it, you have to see it clearly. So let me ask you something. The next time you sit down to work and feel that urge to shift, to check something, to delay, to move away, pause for a moment, and instead of saying, I'm lazy, ask yourself, what is pulling me right now? Because that is where your real enemy begins. Part 2, the trap of productive procrastination. There is a place where most people get stuck, not at failure, not at giving up, but at something far more deceptive, a place where you feel like you're moving but nothing is actually changing, a place where you are always preparing but never truly beginning. This place has a name. It is called productive procrastination, and it is one of the most dangerous traps you will ever encounter. Because unlike laziness, it does not look like inaction. It looks like effort. It looks like learning. It looks like progress. But it is not. Think about this. You sit down with the intention to work. You open your laptop. You prepare your space. You tell yourself, this time I'm serious. But before you begin, a thought appears. I should understand this better first. So you search. You watch a video, then another, then another. Each one feels useful. Each one feels relevant. And because of that, you don't question it. You keep going. An hour passes, then 2. And by the end of it, you haven't actually done the work. But you don't feel idle. You feel productive. That is the trap, because your mind cannot always distinguish between consuming and creating, between preparing and doing, between movement and direction. So it rewards you for activity, even if that activity leads nowhere. This is why productive procrastination is so difficult to detect, because it gives you just enough satisfaction to keep you from feeling guilty. You watched something useful, you learned something new, you explored ideas, but you didn't act. And without action, nothing changes. Now here is where it becomes even more subtle. Productive procrastination often disguises itself as responsibility. You tell yourself, I need to be ready. I need more clarity. I need the right plan. And on the surface, this sounds wise. But if you look deeper, you will see something else. A quiet avoidance of uncertainty. Because the moment you begin, you are exposed. You might not understand. You might make mistakes. You might realize you're not as good as you thought. And the mind does not like that. So instead, it keeps you in a safer space, a space where you are always close to action, but never fully in it, where you can still say, I'm working on it, without ever risking failure. This is why so many people live in a constant loop. They gather information, they refine their plans, they wait for the right moment. But that moment never comes, because it was never about timing. It was about discomfort. Let me give you something simple. There is a difference between learning a skill and watching content about that skill. One builds ability, the other builds illusion. And the more you consume without acting, the stronger that illusion becomes. Until one day, you feel like you've been working for months, but have nothing real to show for it. No output, no results, no movement, only time that quietly slipped away. This is what people mean when they say, I've been busy, but I'm going nowhere. Not because they are lazy, but because their effort has been redirected into safe forms of avoidance. And here is the hardest truth to accept. Productive procrastination does not feel like self-sabotage. It feels like self-improvement. That's why it works. That's why it traps you. That's why it can last for years without you realizing it. You think you're building something, but in reality, you are standing still. So how do you recognize it? You ask yourself one question: am I doing the thing or am I preparing to do the thing? Because those two are not the same. Watching tutorials is not coding. Reading about business is not building one. Planning your workout is not training. Thinking about change is not changing. And until you cross that line, nothing begins. This is why the beginning feels so difficult. Not because it requires more intelligence, but because it requires a willingness to step into imperfection, to act before you feel ready, to move while still uncertain. And this is exactly what productive procrastination prevents. It keeps you comfortable, it keeps you informed, it keeps you safe, but it does not move you forward. So the next time you find yourself researching, watching, preparing, pause and ask yourself honestly, am I avoiding the real task by doing something that feels easier? Because once you see it, the illusion breaks. And once the illusion breaks, you are left with a choice. Stay in preparation or finally begin. Part 3, the mind was never designed for this. At some point, you begin to wonder, if I truly want this, why can't I focus? Why does the mind wander so easily? Why does attention slip away even when you know exactly what you should be doing? It feels like weakness. It feels like a lack of control. But the truth is, it goes deeper than that, because your mind was never designed for the world you're living in now. For most of human history, attention was simple. There were no notifications, no endless streams of content, no constant interruptions. Your environment was limited, your inputs were few. And because of that, your mind could rest in one direction. But today, everything is competing for your attention. Not occasionally, constantly. Every app, every platform, every piece of content is designed to pull you in, to hold you, to keep you engaged, to make you stay just a little longer. And here's the part most people don't realize. It's not random, it's engineered. There are entire teams of people whose job is to study your behavior, to understand what captures your attention, what keeps you scrolling, what makes you click. And once they find it, they refine it again and again until your mind has almost no resistance left. So when you sit down to work and your attention drifts, it's not just you. You are up against systems that are stronger than your willpower, systems designed to fragment your focus, to interrupt your thinking, to keep your mind in a constant state of switching. And every time you switch, something happens inside your brain. It doesn't fully reset. Part of your attention stays behind, on the previous task, on the previous thought, on the previous distraction. So when you return to what you were doing, you're not fully there. You're divided. And the more you switch, the more divided you become. This is why, after a day of doing many things, you feel mentally exhausted, but strangely unfulfilled, because you were never fully present in any of them. Your mind was scattered, pulled in different directions, trying to hold everything but completing nothing. And here's where it becomes even more dangerous. Over time, this constant fragmentation rewires your baseline. Your mind becomes used to short bursts of attention, quick rewards, frequent switching. So when you try to sit with one task for a longer period, it feels uncomfortable, almost painful. Not because the task is hard, but because your mind is no longer trained to stay. It expects stimulation. It expects movement. It expects change. And when that doesn't happen, it begins to search for anything, a thought, a memory, a notification, a reason to leave. And if nothing appears, it creates one. This is why even in a quiet room with no phone, no noise, no interruption, you can still feel distracted, because distraction is no longer outside, it has moved inside. Now here's the key insight. The problem is not that your mind moves. Movement is natural. Thoughts arise, emotions shift, attention flows. That is not the issue. The issue is you were never taught how to return, to bring your attention back again and again without frustration, without judgment, without giving up. So every time your mind drifts, you follow it, not consciously, but automatically. And over time, this becomes a pattern, a habit, a default state. You don't choose distraction, you fall into it. So when you say, I can't focus, what you're really saying is, I haven't trained my mind to come back. Because focus is not about holding attention perfectly. It is about returning every time it leaves, again and again and again. This is the part most people miss. They think focus is something you either have or you don't. But that's not true. Focus is not a trait. It is a skill. And like any skill, it is built through repetition, through awareness, through practice, not in perfect conditions, but in the middle of distraction. So the next time your mind wanders, don't treat it as failure. Don't say, I can't do this. Instead, see it clearly. Notice the moment attention begins to drift and gently bring it back, because that movement, that return, is where focus is built, not in stillness, but in recovery. And the more you practice this, the more stable your mind becomes, not because the world gets quieter, but because you are no longer controlled by its noise. Part 4, the absence of an inner anchor. At this point, you might begin to see something clearly. The problem is not just the world, not the phone, not the noise, not the endless stream of distractions, because even when all of that is removed, the mind still moves. So the question becomes, what is actually missing? Why is it that some people can sit in chaos and remain focused while others lose direction in silence? The answer is simple, but not easy to accept. They have something most people never build, an inner anchor, something that holds their attention in place, not perfectly, but consistently. Think of it like this. If you drop a boat into the middle of the ocean without an anchor, it will drift, not because the boat is broken, but because the environment is moving. The waves shift, the currents pull, the wind changes direction, and the boat follows. This is what happens to your mind. Every thought is a wave. Every notification is a current. Every emotion is a change in wind, and without an anchor, you drift. Not in a dramatic way, but gradually, silently, until you are far away from where you intended to be. And here's the subtle truth. Distraction does not force you. It does not grab you. It does not overpower you. It invites you, and you accept again and again and again. Because there is nothing inside you holding your position, no point of return, no center, no anchor. This is why discipline alone often fails. Because discipline is an external push. It tries to force action, but without an internal anchor, that force cannot be sustained. It runs out. And when it runs out, you fall back. Not because you are weak, but because there is nothing keeping you grounded. Now, here's where it becomes deeper. Most people try to solve distraction by controlling the outside. They remove apps, they silence notifications, they change environments, and these things help, but only temporarily. Because the real issue is not outside, it is inside. If the mind has no anchor, it will create distraction even in emptiness. You sit in a quiet room, no phone, no noise, no interruptions, and still your thoughts begin to move. You remember something, you imagine something, you question something, and before you know it, you are gone again, not physically, but mentally. So the goal is not to eliminate distraction. That is impossible. The goal is to build something stronger than distraction, an internal stability, a center you can return to. In Eastern philosophy, this is often described as a mind that does not move, not because it is rigid, not because it is empty, but because it is not easily swayed. It feels, but it does not follow. It observes, but it does not chase. It notices, but it does not attach. And this changes everything. Because once you have that, distraction loses its power, not because it disappears, but because it no longer controls you. A thought appears, you see it, but you don't leave. A notification sounds, you hear it, but you stay. An urge rises, you feel it, but you don't act on it. And in that moment, something very subtle happens. You begin to separate from your impulses. You realize you are not every thought that appears. You are not every urge that arises. You are the one who decides whether to move or remain. This is the beginning of real control. Not control over the world, but control over your direction. Because without this, every small impulse becomes a command, and you spend your life responding, reacting, following. But with an anchor, you choose, you decide, you stay. And staying is far more powerful than most people understand, because in a world that is constantly pulling you away, the ability to remain is rare, and anything rare becomes valuable. So the next time you feel your attention shifting, don't fight the distraction. Don't blame the environment. Instead, ask yourself, what is holding me right now? And if the answer is nothing, then you've found the real problem, not laziness, not lack of discipline, but the absence of something within you that knows how to stay. Part 5, Fudōshin, the mind that does not move. There is a state that most people have never experienced, not because it is impossible, but because it is rarely trained. A state where the mind remains steady, not frozen, not empty, but grounded, unaffected by every small movement that tries to pull it away. In Japanese philosophy, this state is called Fudōshin. It translates roughly to the mind that does not move. But this can be misunderstood because Fudōshin is not about becoming cold. It is not about suppressing emotions. It is not about forcing yourself to ignore everything. It is something much deeper. It is the ability to feel everything without being controlled by it. Imagine a warrior standing in the middle of battle, noise everywhere, chaos in every direction, uncertainty at every moment. Fear is present, doubt is present, pressure is real, and yet his mind remains clear. Not because he feels nothing, but because he is not carried away by what he feels. That is Fudōshin. Now bring this into your life. Your battlefield is not filled with swords. It is filled with notifications, endless content, random thoughts, internal pressure, different form, same challenge. And most people lose, not because they lack intelligence, but because their mind moves too easily. A notification appears and attention follows. A thought arises and attention follows. A feeling of discomfort appears and attention escapes. There is no resistance, no pause, no awareness, just movement, automatic. And over time, this creates a dangerous pattern. You begin to live reactively, not intentionally. Your actions are no longer chosen, they are triggered. You don't decide what to do, you respond to whatever appears. And this is why, even with goals, even with plans, you cannot stay consistent, because consistency requires stability, and stability requires a mind that does not move with every impulse. This is where Fudōshin becomes essential, because it is not about eliminating distraction, it is about not being ruled by it. Let's make this practical. You sit down to work. Within minutes, a thought appears. Check your phone. In a normal state, you follow it, without thinking, without noticing. But in Fudōshin, something different happens. The thought still appears, but there is a gap, a moment of awareness. You see the thought without becoming it. You feel the urge without obeying it. And in that space, you choose to stay. That moment is everything, because that is where your power exists, not before the thought, not after the action, but in between. And most people never develop that space. They go directly from impulse to action, without interruption, without awareness, without choice. Fudōshin breaks that pattern. It inserts stillness between stimulus and response. And in that stillness, you regain control. Now understand this clearly. Fudōshin is not perfection. You will still get distracted. You will still drift. You will still have moments where you follow the impulse. That is normal. But the difference is you return faster. Instead of being lost for hours, you catch it in minutes. Instead of judging yourself, you simply come back again and again and again. This is how the mind is trained, not by forcing it to never move, but by teaching it how to return, just like a flame in the wind. It may sway, but it does not go out, because its root is strong. And over time, that root grows deeper. Your attention becomes steadier. Your awareness becomes sharper. Your reactions become slower, not weak, controlled. And something else begins to happen. You start to notice things you never saw before. The exact moment distraction begins, the subtle discomfort that triggers escape, the patterns that pull you away. And once you see them, they lose their invisibility. They no longer control you in the same way, because awareness is the first form of freedom. So Fudōshin is not a personality trait. It is not something you are born with. It is a skill, built slowly through repetition, through returning, through staying, when everything inside you wants to leave. And here's the truth. Most people will never build it because it requires something they avoid. Discomfort, not intense discomfort. Not extreme suffering, but the simple discomfort of staying with one thing when your mind wants to escape. That is the training. That is the path. And if you walk it, you begin to experience a different kind of strength. Not loud, not visible, but undeniable. The strength of a mind that no longer moves unless you choose it to. Part 6, training the mind. Returning again and again. Now that you understand the problem and you have seen the pattern, the question becomes simple. What do you actually do? Not in theory, not in philosophy, but in practice. Because insight without action changes nothing. And the mistake most people make at this point is trying to do too much. They think, I need to fix everything. I need to become disciplined overnight. I need to change my entire life. But that approach fails, not because it's wrong, but because it ignores how the mind actually works. The mind does not transform through intensity. It transforms through repetition, small, consistent, intentional repetition. So instead of asking, how do I become completely focused? Ask something smaller, something real. How do I stay for just a little longer than I usually do? That is where training begins. 1. Start with one task and only one fan. When you sit down, choose a single task, not 5, not 3, 1. And once you choose, remove the question. Do not negotiate. Do not reconsider. Because most distraction does not come from outside. It comes from internal negotiation. Should I do this or something else? Is this the best use of my time? Maybe I should switch. Each question pulls you away, so you eliminate the choice. Not because it's perfect, but because movement matters more than optimization. Reduce the entry point. The second mistake people make is making the task too big. Study for 3 hours, work all day, complete everything. That creates resistance. So instead, lower the entry. Set a simple container, 25 minutes. That's it. Not forever, not all day, just 25 minutes of full presence. And within those 25 minutes, you do not switch, you do not check, you do not escape, not because you feel like it, but because you decided. At first, it will feel uncomfortable. Your mind will resist. It will search for exits. It will create reasons. That is not failure. That is the training. 3, expect the mind to move. One of the biggest misunderstandings is thinking that focus means no distraction. That is not true. Your mind will wander. It will drift. It will think. It will try to leave. This is normal. So when it happens, do not react. Do not say, I can't do this. I'm losing focus. Instead, notice it. See the moment attention begins to shift and gently bring it back. No frustration, no judgment, just return, because every return is a repetition, and every repetition strengthens your control. 4, create a simple ritual. Before you begin, pause, just for a few seconds. Take a breath, not a long meditation, not anything complicated, just a signal, a moment that tells your mind, now we do one thing. This matters more than you think, because without a transition, your mind carries the chaos of everything before into what you're about to do. The ritual creates a boundary, a clear start. And 5, move the obvious distractions. You don't need a perfect environment, but you do need to be honest. If your phone is next to you, your mind knows. Even if you don't touch it, part of your attention is already there, waiting, monitoring. So remove it, put it in another room, in a drawer, out of sight, not as punishment, but as support. Because in the beginning, you are not trying to prove strength, you are trying to build it. 6, redefine success. Most people measure success by output. How much did I do? What did I finish? But in this stage, that is the wrong metric. The real question is, did I stay? Did you remain with the task even when your mind wanted to leave? Because that moment is where the change happens. Not when it's easy, not when you feel motivated, but when you choose to stay despite the urge to escape. That is where Fudōshin is built. 7, repeat, without drama. You don't need intensity. You don't need inspiration. You don't need to feel ready. You need repetition. Daily, simple, quiet repetition. Some days will be good. Some days will not. Some days you will stay longer. Some days you will drift more. That is part of the process. The goal is not perfection. The goal is continuity, to keep returning, to keep practicing, to keep showing up. And over time, something begins to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, your mind becomes more stable. The urge to leave becomes weaker. The ability to stay becomes stronger. And what once felt difficult becomes normal. This is how discipline is built, not through force, but through training, not through pressure, but through presence. So don't try to become a different person overnight. Don't try to fix everything at once. Just begin. One task, one block of time, one moment of returning, and then do it again tomorrow. Because in the end, the person who can stay will always outgrow the one who constantly leaves.